In What Works? Gender Equality by Design, Iris Bohnet employs a behavioral approach to indicate where we stand against gender inequalities and how we can further better ourselves as an institution. Bohnet uses a system of comprehensive research and application to provide enough evidence of institutionalized gender inequalities in the workplace and offers constructive solutions to install in day-to-day operations. She argues that it's easier to acknowledge our biases and work towards reducing their effects using research-based approaches. So just a little bit about the author. Iris Bohnet is a behavioral economist at Harvard University, and she focuses on the inequalities primarily within the workplace and schools. She is currently the Albert Pratt Professor of Business and Government and the co-director of Women and Public Policy program at Harvard Kennedy School. Her work focuses on improving decision-making in organizations and societies, specifically regarding gender and diversity. The general overview of her work highlights unconscious bias apparent in our society and how the current attempts to diminish the bias are difficult and expensive. This book is heavily structured around empirical data and research collected by companies, schools, universities, and governments in the United States, Australia, India, Norway, the United Kingdom, Zambia, and other countries. She dives deep with her behavioral assessment and provides evidence-based reasons why specific procedures aren't working and how to implement new solutions to work towards de-biasing the workplace. So part one of What Works serves as Bonnet's overview of what the problem is. She wants the readers to understand that there is a lot of gender bias in society as a whole, but she wants to dive deeper into schools and workplace and really allow the reader to understand that there is a lot of unconscious bias that happens in day-to-day corporations and organizations, and there is a large effect on both men and women. She starts by introducing one of the most defining gender experiments to give the audience immediate insight into the gender inequalities in society and organizations. In 2000, Kathleen McGinn at Harvard Business School wrote a case study regarding Howard Rosen. Howard is a venture capitalist and entrepreneur with a highly equitable skill set. The case study involved his climb to success in the world of business. He was the founder of a powerful tech company and briefly worked as an executive for Apple. Currently, he sits on the board of directors of several prestigious companies and is close friends with Bill Gates and was well acquainted with Steve Jobs. His success is widely celebrated, and he is highly sought after for his business. When the case study was introduced, students were asked their opinion about Howard and whether or not they would hire him or work for him. They rated him highly competent, effective, and skilled, and believed he would be an asset to any company. McGinn's case study is interesting because Howard does not exist. His real name is Heidi, and he is an actual woman. When students studied the identical case with a female protagonist, they still believed that she was competent and effective, as Howard was, but they no longer desired to work with her or hire her onto their teams. And this makes you think. They thought for a woman to climb the ladder of success, she would typically be unlikable and unpleasant. And unfortunately, this is something that many women will run into on job interviews when asking for a promotion or compensation. Many business schools will use this case study as a tool to help their MBA students experience gender bias. Two professors had given one half of their class the original identity of Heidi and the other half the altered identity of Howard. This allowed the professors to compare and contrast their students' feelings about a powerful man versus a powerful woman. When they reviewed the assessments of their students, they learned their ideal leader in their minds was a male. Alternatively, they believed Heidi did not look or act the part for this prestigious role. They think she wouldn't be able to be competent and likable at the same time. However, Howard was ideally the most professional, pleasant, and well-established candidate for this position. In this scenario, what is celebrated as entrepreneurship and self-confidence in a man is viewed as arrogance and self-promotion in a woman. This research further amplified how women are viewed in the business world. In short, women can't win. If women fall under typical stereotypes and conform to a feminine role, they will be liked but not respected. Dozens of studies in the workplace show the difficulties women face when presenting themselves to their male colleagues. On average, every woman will have to decide between competence and likability. Women who attempt to enter a stereotypically male work domain will likely receive backlash and judgment at every stage, such as when they go on interviews, when they're asking for equal or more compensation, and when they're applying for a promotion. Psychologists believe that these negative connotations are due to the discordance between the stereotypical perceptions of what women are or should be like, such as their gender roles, and the qualities we think are necessary to perform a typically male job. The case study with Heidi demonstrates all of the qualifications for a man's job, but socially she's still expected to fit into the ideal woman role. This shift violates social norms and forces women to pay the social price. So this is where Bohnet begins to introduce comparative evaluation as well as other short time and cost-efficient solutions that can be implemented quickly. These solutions will help open the eyes of men and women in the workplace and offer a more leveled playing field. Some solutions include helpful assessment tools, increased transparency, and even simple physical changes. Bohnet describes how Harvard University made the unilateral decision to change its interior design. After decades of housing self-portraits of former leaders, all who were predominantly white men, they opted for a more inclusive and inviting design plan. They learned that women surrounded by photos of only white men felt less empowered, and they were less likely to view themselves as successful leaders. This scenario proves that visible cues in schools and the workplace can affect gender perception, and false representation can lead to gender bias. Comparative evaluation is designed to focus the evaluator's attention on an individual's performance instead of group stereotypes. When candidates were evaluated comparatively, not only did the gender gap vanish completely, but all evaluators now chose the top performer. Bohnet adds comparative evaluations to the list of cost-effective and time-efficient solutions to bridging the gender gap. This strategy is not just fairer, but it's also profit maximizing because it is the preface of Bonnet's work. So part 3 is where Bohnet dives deeper into unconscious gender bias in school and work. And she'll begin to offer solutions for adjusting risk and leveling the playing field. As a professor, Bohnet asked her students to share their grade expectations towards the end of the semester. 70 to 80% of her students believed that they were better than average, and over 30% expected their grades to be in the top 10%. Almost every male fell into the 30%, which showed Bohnet that men tend to be substantially more overly confident than women. Men are more willing to take risks and are more optimistic when assessing risky situations. She found men will typically be more overconfident when placed in a field where they're expected to exceed. She mentions when her colleagues Brad Barber and Terry O'Dean looked at data from a large discount brokerage, they found men were more inclined to take higher risks. Their overconfidence led them to trade 45% more than the female investors. Unfortunately, their confidence projected severe consequences when their investments led to substantial financial loss. These examples suggest that it can be challenging to assess ourselves objectively, and debiasing employees who exhibit overconfidence is challenging. In fact, a meta-analysis examining perceptions of leadership effectiveness across nearly 100 independent samples found that men perceived themselves as being significantly more effective than women did when, in fact, they were rated by others as significantly less effective. On the other hand, women will typically underestimate their intelligence and abilities to perform gender-neutral tasks in fear they will not exceed. Women are more likely to give up on tasks or drop out of classes if their grades are lower than those of their male counterparts. This phenomenon is called the fear of B- effect. This phenomenon can be further assessed in work settings. Bohnet focuses on performance appraisals and how a woman's lack of confidence and a man's overconfidence can affect their performance scores. Many companies will ask their employees to provide a brief assessment of their performances to their supervisors. And in one scenario, a supervisor rates two subordinates, a man and a woman, on a scale from 1 to 10. He scores both man and woman a score of 7. The man is overly optimistic, and when he goes to self-evaluate himself, he rates himself a 9. While the underconfident woman self-evaluates herself at a 5. In meeting the firm's requirements regarding curves, the supervisor could be tempted to reassess his original scores now that he knows their self-evaluation scores. He would downgrade the male employee to an 8 and upgrade the female to a 6. This is referred to as the anchoring effect, and it's when a subordinate inadvertently offers a reference point to their managers who uses it when making their assessments. Bohnet offers an excellent solution to fixing the anchoring effects in performance appraisals. She proposes that organizations do not share employee self-evaluations with their managers before their final assessment is made, or eliminate the need for employees to self-evaluate altogether. Organizations have no way of yielding how harshly women compare themselves to men, but they can contain the impact of gender differences in this bias on people's lives. Instead, she suggests employers should offer constructive feedback to help reassess their perception of where they stand and either motivate or ground them in comparison to others. Once the conclusions are made, Bohnet provides a clear example of how she hopes her work is applied in a real-life scenario. Before behavioral design was introduced, a majority of orchestras used to be all male. When auditions were held, most women wouldn't make the cut because they were less desirable players than men. The behavioral design introduced a system that included a blind screen and a thick carpet that muffled the sound of high heels when the participants entered the room. This way, the interviewers couldn't tell if who was playing the instrument was a man or a woman. This design it didn't involve petitioning or gender equality or targeting either gender. It just allowed the interviewers to make assessments based on the music alone. So it focused everyone's perception on the music instead of the players. And this is what Bohnet wants behavioral design to do in real life. She wants it to be implemented in order to reduce gender equality without having to break apart barriers or implement rules. She wants it to be a light nudge in design to help slowly implement different ways to decrease gender biases. So how does this relate to us as a society? Now that we know about gender bias and unconscious bias in the workplace, as well as gender inequalities, how do we relate to this and how does this apply to us? Bonnet's work allows us to experience different case studies and research projects from all over the world to show us that not only is gender inequality a problem, but it can shape how each of us is treated in school and work and in life. And it shows us how society influences our understandings and perceptions of the differences between masculinity and what society deems appropriate behavior for a man, and femininity and what society deems appropriate behavior for a woman. So if we take a look at what we've learned in sociology of sex and gender, we can begin to establish a better understanding as to why gender is shaped by specific social processes. These core sociological concepts and theories about gender let us understand things and ask questions like, why are men more desirable candidates to employers than women? If a man and a woman are being hired for the same position, why is it more likely that a man will be hired instead of a woman? Bohnet touches upon the pay gap quite often in her book, but we still ask, why does the pay gap still exist? And what can we do to close it? And we can also begin to ask why there are still jobs that are gendered. Why is it more acceptable for a man to be a doctor and for women to be a nurse, but not vice versa? Bonnet's work brings all of these questions up in real life scenarios and offers solutions to begin solving them and answering them. So how can we apply this information? A lot of what Bohnet is trying to do is to spread this information so that organizations and governments and institutions can understand that there is a problem with the way that programs and procedures are implemented within day-to-day operations and how it affects the different genders. So in order to apply the information that we're receiving, it's important that we become aware that first there is an actual problem. And then we have to begin taking credibility. A majority of people will say that they do not progress gender bias, that they're not responsible, that they should not be credible because they don't do anything to specifically target or diminish women. So what she wants us to do is to become more of an advocate. She wants us to further the conversation. She wants us to be implemented in organizations. She wants people to pick up these procedures. She wants these behavioral designs to be implemented so that instead of gender inequality being diminished over the decades, it can be diminished in over the next few years. So I selected this book specifically to go more in depth about women in the workplace and how gender affects to job interviews and evaluations and promotions and pay and the overall treatment between genders. And I was also interested in seeing how sociology ties into how we perceive the genders specifically in the workplace. I was very impressed with how much useful information was provided by Bohnet and how straightforward her suggestions are. The last 30 pages of the book are all citations because of how much information she pulls from different sources to present to her audience in a way that they can understand what the problems are and if these behavioral designs are implemented, how well they'll begin to work. She's not shy when it comes to establishing the problem and highlighting why women run into so many shortcomings. A lot of what she discusses is based solely around sociology and how men and women are viewed by society. So I highly suggest this book to anyone who is interested in diving deeper into gender in the workplace. So I do think that Bohnet did an absolute fantastic job at presenting this information. I do have additional suggestions, such as removing the gender pay gap. She does touch upon why this is a problem and how we can work towards making a solution. Removing the gender pay gap, organizations can promote gender equality in the workplace, and they can do this just by being transparent about pay, to ensure fair treatment among men and women who are working the same roles. I also think that using a skills-based assessment would help eliminate the idea that there are jobs that are built for men and jobs that are built for women. During interviews, asking possible candidates to perform tasks that they would be expected to carry out on a day-to-day basis could help provide more suitable employees based off their ability and experience rather than outside influences or biases. I also think that having women mentoring men could help generate more empathy and cooperation between coworkers and provide invaluable experience to both men and women. And making work-life balance a priority could benefit both men and women because it would eliminate the idea that a man's role in his family is to be the breadwinner and also allow single mothers with children to work flexible hours. This encourages fair treatment of gender roles and can help encourage employees to put their best foot forward.